Part 1: The Death Row Inmate Who Refused to Die. Have you ever heard of a man who was sentenced to death, not once, but 3 times? A man who survived 7 scheduled executions. Every time death came knocking, a last-minute phone call pulled him back from the edge of oblivion. Tommy Arthur was no ordinary killer. They called him the Houdini of Alabama's death row, a man who could seemingly escape execution like a magician escaping a straitjacket. When he entered Alabama's infamous Holman prison in the early 1980s, he carried with him a death sentence. But instead of meeting the fate prescribed to him, he lingered, appealed, and fought, again and again, as though playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with the justice system. Nearly 4 decades passed. While the outside world changed, Tommy Arthur lived. He survived 7 execution dates, days on which his heart should have stopped, his body gone cold. But instead, he kept breathing, kept resisting, and kept denying the crime for which he was condemned, murder for hire. Beyond the prison walls, another family was living in the shadow of trauma. The family of Troy Wicker, the victim, who was found shot in the face while lying in bed one cold morning in 1982. His wife, Judy Wicker, at first claimed a masked intruder had raped her and killed her husband. But the truth behind her story was a nightmare of its own. She had hired a hitman to kill her husband, and that hitman, she later claimed, was Tommy Arthur. It would take 35 years, 3 convictions, dozens of appeals, and the involvement of the United States Supreme Court before Tommy Arthur's name finally appeared on the official death record. But when he was finally executed in 2017, the world wasn't left with closure, only a haunting question. Did we just execute the wrong man? In his final years, Arthur persistently requested DNA testing to prove his innocence, requests that the courts denied. A strand of hair found at the crime scene didn't match him. Another man even confessed to the murder, claiming Arthur was innocent, but that confession was swiftly discarded as unreliable. Was Tommy Arthur a cold-blooded killer, manipulating the law and faking victimhood? Or was he truly a victim, of a conspiracy, of injustice, and of a legal system desperate to close a long unsolved case? This is not just a story about a murder. Not just about a death sentence. This is a decades-long battle, between truth, justice, and death itself. Part 2, The Death Row Profile, Who Was Tommy Arthur? In the darkness of solitary confinement, he sat, silent, expressionless, unrepentant. His eyes didn't reflect those of a cold-blooded killer, but they didn't look entirely innocent either. Safety pin a killer. Even before the murder for hire. Tommy Arthur, born in 1941 in Alabama, wasn't a quiet, law-abiding man before Troy Wicker was murdered. In fact, he had already served time for murder, a detail that led many to believe he was a hidden serial offender, the kind of man who vanishes after a crime, only to strike again when no one expects it. Back in 1977, Arthur had been convicted for killing a man involved with his then-girlfriend. It was said to be a violent act of jealousy. He was sentenced to 30 years but was eventually transferred to a minimum security work release center, where inmates were allowed to leave during the day for outside jobs. It was there that he met Judy Wicker, the woman who would later become the center of a chilling conspiracy. On the surface, Tommy Arthur was charming, articulate, and even humorous. Prison guards once described him as likable and composed. But beneath the surface, he was calculating, deeply knowledgeable about the law, and eerily skilled at turning the system on its head. Over nearly 35 years of appeals, Arthur wrote thousands of pages of legal motions, studied criminal law like a real attorney, and often left Alabama's justice system puzzled. Some called him the old fox of death row, a man fighting not only to survive but to outwit the law. Unlike many death row inmates, Arthur never confessed, not even after being sentenced to die for the third time. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He didn't seek mercy. Instead, he calmly insisted he was innocent, framed by Judy Wicker, set up by the system, and condemned without proof. "I didn't kill anyone. I didn't take money from Judy. I wasn't there. I don't deserve to die," Arthur wrote in a farewell letter to his daughter. A guilty man can lie. But a man staring death in the face, what reason does he have to keep lying? Criminal profilers have said Tommy Arthur's case was one of the most difficult to analyze. He showed no visible remorse, but had no record of violence in prison. He didn't exhibit serious mental illness, yet often claimed he was being watched or targeted. He refused to cooperate with investigators, yet wrote openly to journalists and gave interviews to publicly declare his innocence. So the question remains, was Tommy Arthur a master manipulator, or a highly intelligent man trying to survive a corrupt system? One of the strangest details in the case, the suspect at the scene was described as wearing women's clothes and a wig. And in fact, a brown wig was recovered, but the DNA on the hair did not match Arthur. So who wore it? And why did Judy, the victim's wife, insist it was Arthur? Was he truly in disguise to murder Troy Wicker, as Judy claimed? Or was there another person, still unnamed, who committed the crime and vanished? He had killed before. He was released early. He fell for a married woman. And then, her husband died, from a single cold bullet, while lying on his pillow. Part 3, Death in the Bedroom, How Did Troy Wicker Die? On a February morning in 1982, in the quiet town of Muscle Shoals, a gunshot tore through the still air, and shattered what seemed to be a peaceful family. A husband dead. A wife raped. And the killer? A shadow in women's clothes, wearing a wig, who vanished without a trace. February 1st, 1982. Troy Wicker, 35 years old, was asleep in the bedroom of his modest Alabama home. He had no idea this would be the last time he ever woke up. Around 8 a.m., police received a frantic 911 call from his wife, Judy Wicker, then 34, claiming an intruder had broken into their home, raped her, and shot her husband while he was still in bed. When officers arrived, they found Troy dead, blood soaking through the pillow, a bullet through his face. He was still in his pajamas, lying slightly turned on his side, as if caught mid-dream. There were no signs of a struggle. No neighbors heard screams. Everything was too neat, too quiet, too suspicious. Judy Wicker said the attacker had surprised her while she was getting ready for work. The man was dressed as a woman, wearing a wig and a disguise. He raped her in the living room, then calmly walked into the bedroom and shot Troy without saying a word. At first glance, she looked like a victim, her face bruised, clothes disheveled, trembling voice. But soon, police noticed strange inconsistencies. Her dress wasn't torn. Her makeup was almost intact. Her injuries seemed far too mild for such a violent assault. More importantly, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows or doors, no strange footprints, and no evidence that anyone else had been in the house. A rape without DNA. A murder without a trace of blood on the killer. A witness statement, too perfect to be real. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered Judy had been having a secret relationship with Tommy Arthur, a man on work release from a prior murder conviction. They had met at a local warehouse where both were assigned to work, and their bond grew in secret. Then came another detail. Judy had recently taken out a life insurance policy on Troy worth $90,000, just weeks before the murder. Her story began to unravel. She grew evasive, inconsistent, sometimes saying the intruder was tall, then short, white, then dark-skinned. And then, it all broke down. Months later, Judy was convicted of perjury and insurance fraud. In a shocking courtroom moment, she suddenly changed her entire story. She said, "I lied. I hired Tommy Arthur to kill my husband. I paid him. I staged the rape." The courtroom fell silent. Why did she change her story? According to case files, Judy made a plea deal to reduce her own sentence in exchange for testifying against Arthur. But that only raised more questions. Was she finally telling the truth? Or was this a desperate woman bargaining with lies to escape prison? At the crime scene, police recovered a brown wig and a pair of gloves. Hair found on the wig was tested, and did not match Tommy Arthur. If Judy was telling the truth, why didn't the DNA match? If she was lying, why risk pointing the finger at Arthur, a known killer, and create such an elaborate hoax? A cold death in a warm bedroom. A wife turned victim, then turned killer. A story that changed a man's destiny, with just one sentence. Part 4, The 7 Failed Executions, When Death Turned Back 7 Times. Some people fear death. Some accept it. But Tommy Arthur? He faced death 7 times, and survived every single one. Each time, he lay in wait, staring into the void, and death blinked. Was it divine intervention? Or was the justice system too afraid to kill a man who might be innocent? Tommy Arthur, Alabama's most notorious death row inmate, was scheduled for execution 7 times between 2001 and 2017. And all 7 times, he slipped through death's fingers. Not through miracles, but through last-minute stays, legal interventions, and unanswered questions that haunted his case. Execution 1 to 2001, a late-night reversal. Arthur's first execution was scheduled for 2001. He had written his final letters and made peace with his fate. But less than 12 hours before the injection, the federal appeals court issued an emergency stay. The reason? Judy Wicker's shifting testimony and key DNA evidence never tested. I heard the guard say, "It's been delayed." I didn't believe him. I thought maybe I'd already died and just didn't know it. Execution 2 to 2007, halted over a technical error. Arthur was led into the death chamber at Holman Prison. The straps were tightened. The 4 was ready. 15 minutes before the injection, Arthur's legal team pointed out inconsistencies in the official time of the victim's death, forcing the U.S. Supreme Court to issue a last-minute stay. I could smell the disinfectant. I was sure this was it. Then, the phone rang. Execution 3 to 2008, a governor's intervention. This time, it was the governor of Alabama who personally halted the execution, after receiving a flood of appeals from Arthur's family and human rights groups. Why? A new witness emerged, claiming to have overheard Judy Wicker confess to orchestrating the murder herself. Another stay. Another breath. I wasn't sure if I was being saved, or just dragged through a longer torture. Execution 4 to 2012, DNA that no one wanted to test. Arthur requested DNA testing on hair found in the killer's wig, evidence that had never been tested. The execution was delayed while courts reviewed the motion. Eventually, Alabama denied the request, saying it was unnecessary. Still, the execution did not proceed. I didn't ask for mercy. I asked for the truth. They wouldn't give it to me, but they still wouldn't kill me. Execution 5 to 2015, the last meal that wasn't. Arthur ate his last meal, fried chicken, bread, soda. He was moved to the holding cell, then into the death chamber. Only 2 hours before the scheduled injection, a federal court stepped in again, this time questioning the humanity and legality of Alabama's lethal injection protocol. I took a bite of chicken thinking, this is the last taste I'll ever know. But I kept breathing. Execution 6 to 2016, the 11-minute save. Arthur was strapped to the table. The 4 was in place. The room lights dimmed. Just 11 minutes before the execution was to begin, a phone rang, a direct call from the governor's office. The execution was suspended again. I stared at the ceiling and thought, if God exists, this might be his hand. Execution 7 to 2017, the one that went through. After 36 years on death row, after surviving 6 execution dates, Tommy Arthur did not escape the 7th. On May 25, 2017, at 11:50 p.m., the lethal drugs entered his bloodstream. He died within minutes, at age 75. Until his final breath, he maintained his innocence. No DNA was tested. No answers were given about why Alabama refused to test key evidence. Only a dead man remained, and a string of unburied secrets. 7 times in the death chamber. 7 times he looked death in the face and lived. When it takes 7 tries to kill a man, can justice really claim it was sure? Or was it just playing a role, until the curtain fell? Part 5, The Final Execution, Tommy Arthur's Death and the Unanswered Mysteries. When the needle pierced his skin and poison coursed through his veins, every word became too late. But Tommy Arthur's death, after 36 years on death row and surviving 6 previous executions, raises the most terrifying question of all. Did we just kill an innocent man? On May 25, 2017, Tommy Arthur was removed from his solitary death row cell. He was 75 years old. Frail. Sunken eyes from over 3 decades of waiting for death. At exactly 11:50 p.m., the needle went in. The red light switched on. There was no phone call. No last-minute stay. No new witness. No DNA tests. For the first time in 7 scheduled executions, everything was silent. It felt as though the justice system had decided. Let's end all doubts, with death. Arthur looked through the thick execution chamber glass. On the other side were the victim's family, prison officials, journalists, and state representatives. His final words were, "I did not kill Troy Wicker. I love my family. I love my children. I forgive those who cannot see the truth. No apologies. No confession. Only a final, unwavering declaration of innocence." What haunts many to this day is that the state of Alabama refused to conduct DNA tests on crucial evidence that still existed. A hair found in the wig used by the killer. Bloodstains that didn't match the victim. Physical samples never tested with modern technology. Arthur's attorneys begged for testing. Human rights groups, journalists, even former prosecutors joined the call. But Alabama refused, not for legal reasons, but simply because they said it was unnecessary. Why would a state refuse to test DNA, something that could eliminate all doubt? Was it because they feared what they might find? To this day, the case against Tommy Arthur remains riddled with disturbing inconsistencies. Judy Wicker only changed her story after being offered a reduced sentence. No physical evidence directly tied Arthur to the murder. The original witness described the shooter as a black man. Arthur was white. No forensic evidence was ever re-examined with modern science. And now, none of it ever will be. Because the man at the center of it all is dead. No one can say for sure if Tommy Arthur was guilty. But almost everyone agrees, this was one of the most controversial executions in U.S. history. And it leaves behind a haunting message. When justice refuses to ask questions, then death is no longer justice. It's just a sentence, against the truth. If Tommy Arthur was innocent, then the real killer of Troy Wicker is still out there. And worse. We may have executed the wrong man. A man who survived death 6 times. Only to die because of society's blind faith in its own system.